The world celebrated the Abraham Accords as a historic breakthrough for peace in the Middle East. But the Bible's prophets issued a chilling warning thousands of years ago. When they say, "Peace and safety, destruction will come upon them suddenly." You are not watching a peace process. You are watching a prophetic time bomb being armed. The Apostle Paul, in 1 Thessalonians 5, delivered one of the most critical prophecies about the end times. He writes that the day of the Lord will come like a thief in the night. This isn't a single day, but an extended era of divine judgment, also known as the Great Tribulation. The Old Testament prophets like Isaiah and Joel described it as a day of wrath and fierce anger, a day of darkness and gloom, when God would finally rise to judge the wickedness of the world. And Paul gives us the final trigger for this apocalyptic period. He states with absolute clarity, while people are saying peace and security, then sudden destruction will come upon them as labor pains come upon a pregnant woman, and they will not escape. The catalyst for judgment is not a world at war, but a world celebrating a false, man-made peace. It is a peace that ignores God, and therefore it is a peace that cannot last. Now consider the signing of the Abraham Accords in 2020. The language used by world leaders was one of unprecedented optimism. They hailed it as a new dawn for the Middle East and a historic breakthrough that would unlock a future of peace and prosperity for the entire region. This language, broadcast across the globe, is a direct echo of the very words Paul warned about nearly 2,000 years ago. From a prophetic perspective, this cry of peace and security is not a sign of comfort, but a potential tripwire for the beginning of the end.
While Paul warns of a false peace, it is the prophet Daniel who provides the political trigger that starts the prophetic clock. In his famous 70 weeks prophecy in Daniel chapter 9, the angel Gabriel lays out a precise timeline for Israel's future. The prophecy foretells that a future leader, often identified as the Antichrist, will rise to power. Daniel 9 verse 27 says of this figure, "And he shall confirm a covenant with many for 1 week." In the language of this prophecy, 1 week represents 7 years. This means that this future ruler will confirm, strengthen, or make a firm treaty with Israel and many other nations that will last for 7 years. This act is what many scholars believe begins the final 7-year tribulation period. The key to this prophecy is a covenant with many. For centuries, Israel has largely been isolated in the Middle East, but the Abraham Accords have changed that. For the first time, Israel has entered into a formal, public, peace and normalization agreement with a coalition of Arab nations, the Many. While the current accords are not the 7-year treaty itself, many prophecy watchers see them as the foundation, the necessary political framework for that future covenant. They believe a charismatic world leader could emerge in a time of global crisis and confirm or expand upon these existing accords, adding security guarantees, and in doing so, officially start the clock on Daniel's 70th week. The Abraham Accords, therefore, may be the political stage being built for the final act.
For nearly 2,000 years, a central piece of end-times prophecy has been impossible to fulfill: the rebuilding of a Jewish temple in Jerusalem. This is not just a symbolic hope, it is a prophetic necessity.
Jesus himself, in Matthew 24, warns of a future event called the abomination of desolation, spoken of by the prophet Daniel, standing in the holy place. For there to be a holy place to desecrate, a holy temple must first exist. The Apostle Paul is even more specific. He describes the Antichrist as the one who will sit in God's temple, proclaiming himself to be God. This act of ultimate blasphemy is the pivotal event of the final 7 years. This too requires a physical, functioning temple on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. The problem, of course, is that the Temple Mount is currently home to the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque. This is why the Abraham Accords are so prophetically significant. They create a political atmosphere where a temple agreement could even be conceived. And this isn't just a distant dream. In Israel today, organizations like the Temple Institute have already recreated the sacred temple vessels, the golden menorah, the priestly garments, the altar, all according to exact biblical specifications. They are actively breeding red heifers, required for the biblical purification ceremony needed to restart temple worship. The preparations are already underway. The only missing piece is the political one. A charismatic world leader building on the foundation of the Abraham Accords could broker a deal of the century that allows for a third temple to be built, perhaps as a grand gesture of peace. This peace treaty, therefore, becomes the key that unlocks the door for the final, most dramatic prophecies to be set in motion.
The Bible warns that in the last days, a world in chaos will be desperate for a savior. Into this void, a figure will emerge. The book of Daniel describes him as a little horn with the eyes of a man and a mouth that spoke boastfully. He is portrayed as a master of intrigue, a political genius who becomes incredibly powerful, but not by his own power, hinting at a supernatural source for his meteoric rise. Crucially, the prophet says this man will cause deceit to prosper, and he will consider himself superior. And in one of the most chilling phrases in all of prophecy, Daniel states that through peace he shall destroy many. His greatest weapon is not war, but a deceptive peace treaty that lulls the world into a false sense of security. The book of Revelation adds to this portrait, describing a beast to whom the world gives authority. This figure is given a mouth to utter proud words and blasphemies, and is granted global dominion over every tribe, people, language, and nation. He will be the one who finally brokers the impossible Middle East peace, confirming the covenant with Israel and many nations, and will be hailed as a global savior for his efforts. The Abraham Accords, therefore, are so prophetically significant because they have created the expectation for such a man. They have laid the groundwork and shown that a regional peace deal is possible. The world is now psychologically prepared to accept and praise a great leader who can finalize this process. But the Bible warns that this great peacemaker will ultimately be the great deceiver.
For 3.5 years, the world will likely experience the peace that this charismatic leader has promised. The 7-year covenant with Israel will be in effect, and the rebuilt Jewish temple will likely be operating. But the prophecy of Daniel gives a precise timeline for this peace, and it is
brutally short. Daniel 9:27 states that in the middle of the week, exactly halfway through the 7-year treaty, he will put an end to sacrifice and offering. This is the great betrayal. But it is also an event that has a historical precedent. Hundreds of years before Jesus, the prophet Daniel foretold that a ruler would come and commit an abomination that causes desolation. This was partially fulfilled in 167 BC by a tyrannical Greek king named Antiochus Epiphanes. He stormed Jerusalem, entered the Second Temple, and erected a statue of Zeus. He then desecrated the holy altar by sacrificing a pig on it. This horrific act was a dress rehearsal for the end times. When Jesus spoke in Matthew 24, he referenced Daniel's prophecy long after Antiochus had already come and gone. He was making it clear that there would be a final, future fulfillment of this event. The Apostle Paul confirms this, saying the Antichrist will set himself up in God's temple, proclaiming himself to be God. This is the moment the peacemaker's mask comes off. He will walk into the holy place of the third temple, stop the sacrifices, and demand that the world worship him as God. Jesus warns that when this event happens, it will trigger a time of great tribulation, unequaled from the beginning of the world until now, and never to be equaled again. The peace treaty is not the goal, it is the trap, designed to set the stage for this ultimate act of blasphemy.
So let us assemble the pieces of this prophetic puzzle. The Bible lays out a clear, sequential timeline for the final days. It begins with a global cry of peace and safety. It is formalized by a charismatic world leader who confirms a 7-year covenant with Israel and many nations. This peace deal makes possible the rebuilding of the Jewish temple in Jerusalem. And at the halfway point of that treaty, the leader reveals his true nature, enters the temple, and commits the abomination of desolation, triggering the Great Tribulation. For centuries, this timeline seemed like a distant, almost impossible scenario. The pieces were not on the board. But our generation is the first to witness the necessary preconditions falling into place with stunning speed. The Abraham Accords, for all the good they may accomplish in the short term, are a monumental step toward creating the very peace and safety environment Paul warned of. They have fundamentally redrawn the map of the Middle East, creating for the first time a coalition of Arab nations in a public, formal peace with Israel. They have created the exact framework, a covenant with many, that the prophet Daniel described. They have made the once unthinkable discussion of a third temple a political possibility. Therefore, we must watch these accords with discerning eyes. They are not just a political development, they are a profound prophetic development. They may very well be the most significant piece of prophetic stage setting in our lifetime, preparing the way for a future leader to confirm the final covenant and start the clock on the end of days. The Abraham Accords have built the stage. The prophecies of Daniel and the Apostle Paul have written the script. The world is now waiting for the one man with the power and charisma to step into the spotlight and confirm the final covenant. The peace is fragile, and the clock is ticking. This briefing is now complete, but the investigation never ends. To ensure you receive all future declassifications, be sure to subscribe and activate the notification bell. Like this video to signal its importance, and share it with others who are ready to look beyond the headlines. Leave your own intel in the comments below, because there is still much more to declassify.